Mr. Chairman, thanks for having this hearing and focusing our attention on these issues in this open setting. I wanted to start by making reference to Mr. Ivanini's background. He's a Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania native, a Valley View High School graduate, also a degree from Wilkes University. So I just hope after your career is over that you at least retire in Lackawanna County. But we're grateful for your public service and for the work you continue to do. I will probably direct my what I hope would be two questions to Ms. Puglisi and Mr. Pottinger, but Bill, feel free to weigh in as well. I wanted to start with an issue that Senator Cornyn and I worked on, especially in the lead up to the most recent competition legislation. We introduced a bill called the National Critical Capabilities Defense Act. It would establish an interagency committee to review outbound transactions, not inbound, but outbound, by U.S. firms to non-market economies like China that would, in my judgment and the judgment of a lot of people, result in the outsourcing of critical supply chains and create further U.S. dependence upon a non-market economy like China. I guess my first question is, to what extent is that kind of outbound investment by U.S. companies to non-market economies like China compromising our supply chain security and then subsequently our national security?
Thank you, Senator. I am not familiar with the legislation that you put forward, but I will comment on the supply chain question, the latter part. I think it's very important. And we see just most recently with PPE and how unreliable some of those supplies were. A colleague of mine has done a lot of research on medical supply chains, and especially as we discuss, okay, how do we have pandemic responsiveness when our supply chain, especially for APIs, especially for some basic drugs, are not located here. And so I think that gets back to the comment that I made in my prepared remarks about as we're examining those supply chains, we really need to look at, okay, what is the best value for the nation as opposed to the lowest cost? But that also gets at some of the market access issues as well, because we have seen cases, and I actually put in my written testimony about cases where because of that market access, we have pharmaceutical companies that are sending or closing down those API or kind of your more basic drugs manufacturing here and actually manufacturing those in China. So that with the draw of, okay, then they'll be able to sell some of their more lucrative materials there. Thank you. Mr. Pottinger, any thoughts you have on
this? Thanks, Senator. Yeah, I think that I laud the goal that you're pursuing here, and with this legislation, which I haven't yet read, but look, the Department of Commerce has already declared 6 nations that are quote unquote adversaries of the United States. China's at the top of the list, together with others that you might imagine, Russia and Iran and a few others. One of the reasons that Beijing may have felt so confident and not, it really didn't bat an eye before destroying almost $1 trillion in shareholder value in its publicly listed firms in the United States, was because it's getting tens of billions of dollars through other means from more passive sources in the United States. These are institutional investors who are passively tying their money in the form of bond purchases and stock purchases to indexes. These index providers are weighing Chinese companies much more heavily than they used to, even as China becomes less and less transparent of an ecosystem to invest in. Almost every American reporter has now been kicked out of China. We have no idea what's going on with Chinese companies, yet these index providers keep putting more prominent weighting on Chinese companies so that more and more passive investment, ultimately hundreds of billions of dollars, is going into Chinese stocks and bonds. That's a big problem. So I think if we had sort of an outbound CFIUS mechanism, that's definitely worth exploring. The others look at Hong Kong. as well. Hong Kong has now, unfortunately, been turned into a typical Chinese city, and we should be treating them the way that we treat mainland China when it comes to inbound and outbound investment.
Thanks very much. Mr. Chairman, I'll submit a question for the record on intellectual property, but we'll do that for the record.
I think you're pursuing an interesting line of questioning, and I think what Mr. Pottinger just said there, it wasn't just the folks that went directly in to some of these companies who've lost all this value, but oftentimes the passive investors. And the thing is, these companies are not going to disappear. They may simply be replaced with more Chinese investors and a more compliant leadership in those firms. Senator Gillibrand.